First of all, in order to understand why Plato thinks that the good life is the good moral life, or the happy life is the good moral life, we have to understand a little bit about what he believes about the self or the soul. The easiest way to think about it is that is an immaterial aspect of ourselves that transcends the body. But more specifically, what does the soul do, right? So for Plato, the soul is actually what determines our actions, i.e., something transcendent from the body that determines the behaviors that we take, right? Now, here's an example from the text under the section on the form of the good. And he says, "Now this was a good reason that pleased me. It seemed to me somehow to be a good thing that intelligence should be the reason for everything." In other words, he liked the idea or believed that intelligence is the explanation for things, i.e. the world, right? Kind of like the notion that we touched upon in Xenophanes, where he thought that God ordered things, all things in the world, gave things structure, very much like Heraclitus as well. There was an intelligent structure to reality, right? It is patterned, it is rational. And so this is what Socrates thinks is a good explanation, right? That intelligence should be the reason for everything or explain everything, right? So that if someone, he says, wanted to find out the reason why each thing comes to be or perishes or exists, this is what the person must find out. How is it best for that thing to exist or act or be acted upon, right? So this is how we are to truly explain and understand things, right? The ultimate reality. So ultimately, he thinks that the highest knowledge is to understand things with our intelligence, right? And to see the intelligence behind all things, which includes seeing how or why things are ordered in the way they are, i.e. in the best way possible. That's why he thinks that the highest knowledge is to understand the form of the good, because the form of the good is that which orders things in the best way possible. So the challenge is this, though, for us, the story of the Ring of Gyges, which is a young man that comes into some ruins and he discovers essentially a ring. And in the ring, he can turn the ring inwards, and when he does so, he becomes invisible. The story goes that this person perhaps was a good person, yeah, before taking this ring or finding this ring. And then when he had this power to be invisible, he ends up taking a position in the king's court, seduces the queen and takes over the kingdom, right? And basically takes power of the kingdom. And that's what he decides to do because of this power, right? So then the challenge is, do we truly want to be good people, right? Life. This was the question posed to Socrates, right? Isn't what we all really want to live an unjust life? Meaning that we get to do anything we want. We don't have to consider other people, their feelings or their possessions. We can take their possessions if we can, right? I.e. be evil, be unethical. And that therefore this immoral life is the good life, what we all truly want actually. And we can translate that in more modern language with the question of, well, is the life of pleasure the truly happy life, the truly good life, or the life of power or fame or material wealth, or in a nutshell, getting anything you want in life? Is that truly the good life? And Plato's answer is no, right? He says the good life is not these external based, generally, life of pleasure and so forth and power. And so the question is why? How can Socrates or Plato answer this question as to how a morally good person is actually living the best life, the most fulfilling life, the life worth living that Socrates talks about, right? Like this is weird. Why would we want to live a good moral life, in other words, right? What's the motivation? Are we truly happier than someone who does whatever they want, right? Or an unjust person? And this is what Socrates wants to argue. And he basically has a comparison or an analogy where he has the idea of an ideal state, right? What would the perfect government or state look like? And he says, if we can imagine the perfect state or the just state. That's what the soul should look like. Right? So what does a perfect state look like in which there's justice? Basically, he talks about three parts of the state. He says you have the rulers, those who rule. You have the warriors, those who protect and fight for the state, and then you have the workers, right? So these are the three general state parts of the state according to Plato. So then what does justice look like? He says, well, the perfect state is a state in which each part of the state performs its function well. Each part of the state performs its proper function well. In other words, each part does what it's supposed to be doing without interfering with the other ones. And that's the perfect just state. Well, how does that look like exactly? Well, the workers would be doing the work, right, and providing the food and the things that we need, our basic needs, right? The warriors are the protectors, the ones who are passionate, right, and fight for the protection of the state, for what is good and just and so forth. So they sort of have that kind of strength, the power to fight. And then the rulers are the ones who structure things and make the laws, right, and give the laws to society and tells what the other two parts should do, right? In other words, guides the warriors when they should fight, under what conditions and when and so forth, as well as the workers. It orders the workers who should be doing what kind of job and so forth. So the rulers structure both the workers and the warriors and tell them what to do and how to act. So when each part is doing their role properly, this would be a just state, right? So if the warriors try to take over the rulers and do what they want, right, then they would be interfering with the role of the rulers, who should know what is truly best for the state. And so they might make wrong decisions if the warriors start trying to rule. If the workers as well are, at the top and trying to make all the laws and make all the decisions, they might not have the understanding of how things should work, and therefore they might make the wrong decisions. If they're proper rulers, then the rulers should know, right, have knowledge or wisdom of how things should be structured. They should know what the ideal state should look like, right, and how things should work. And that's why they're rulers. In other words, they should be qualified. They should have the proper kind of knowledge to guide the others, right? And so in a bad state, in an unjust state, then those who have the wisdom, the knowledge, are not the rulers. They're doing some menial work, or they're in the military. And though they have the knowledge, they're not being the guides. They're not being the rulers, as they should be. So the ideal state is where the rulers, those who have the true wisdom of how society should be structured in the best way possible, i.e. having the knowledge of the good, for Plato, they're the ones who should be guiding the rest of the state. And if they're not, then you're not in the ideal state, right? So the ideal state is a state in which the rulers are performing their role properly with the proper knowledge and implementing and guiding society, and then the warriors are performing their function of fighting and protecting and so forth, and the workers are doing their work. Similarly, the just person is a person in which the three parts of their soul is harmonized. Right. Just like each part of the state, the parts of the soul are performing their functions well without interfering with the other ones, right? And so your soul would be just or in alignment and balance. And so what does that mean? For Plato, the three parts of the soul in a nutshell are reason, the spirited element, and the appetites. So now, what are the roles of each? Well, reason is supposed to guide, just like the rulers. The spirited element is that passionate side of us that animates us, right? That makes us do things and fight for things, right? If we feel something is unjust, we have that passion to fight for it, right? So it's perhaps correlated to our heart, right? We might say. Then the appetites have to do with our lower or bodily nature of plain desires, right? That motivates us to do things, but based on mere desire, right? Ultimately, Plato gives this analogy that an unjust soul is one in which the different parts of the soul are not in alignment or not ordered properly, i.e., you're not being guided by reason, but a lower part of the soul, and so forth. For example, he gives the analogy of two horses and a chariot, right? And the two horses have different natures, right? One is more wild, and the other one is more sort of, domestic and does what it's supposed to do, what it was trained to do. But the other one is wild and just does whatever it wants randomly. So the analogy is the one who's doing the random actions, the wild horse, that's like the desires, always going in different directions and so forth. And then the spirited element is symbolized by the other horse who's more sort of wants to do the right thing. So that's the spirited element. And then reason is supposed to be symbolized by the charioteer. But in this analogy, he says, imagine that the charioteer is not in charge and the horses are going in their own directions. So then the person can literally, the charioteer could literally fall over and die or get hurt because the horses are pulling the chariot in different directions, i.e. he's not in control. And so he's saying that the soul then, who's guided by the lower parts, the lower natures, and not the intellect and reason in accordance with the form of the good, he says that person is torn in different directions. So the unjust person is someone who's being guided by their lower natures, and ultimately that leads to a dissatisfied life, because he gives the example of a tyrannical ruler that can do whatever he wants, right? And he actually says that this person, might want, I don't know, a buffet, a big feast one day, but also want to go see his mother, and then also want to take over some kingdom, and also want to be the best poet, right? And then he's torn in all these different directions, and actually will be always dissatisfied, because he will have disharmony in himself. And so ultimately, he says this person is torn and not at peace, and therefore will actually be unhappy and in a bad state. And contrarily, when someone is guided by reason, they develop certain virtues, certain inner qualities of the soul that make them harmonious, and they're not in conflict with their desires or their spirited element, because their reason has learned to see the good and know what is good for them and for others, and how they should live in a way that structures their own life in the best way possible. Therefore, they're actually living in a beautiful, harmonious, balanced way that participates in the form of the good, or imitates the good, because it's structuring itself in the best ways possible. Learns to perform, let's say, their job well in society, that person understands their role in society and does it well. So to live a life based on reason and understanding, guiding yourself and developing your virtues and putting your virtues in alignment with the good of the state and everyone around you, then you are embodying the good, right? You're imitating the highest form of the good, which is the source of existence, according to Plato, that harmonizes and make things the way they are. If the form of the good, which is the source of reality, orders things in the best way possible and creates beauty and order, then in our lives being structured in accordance with reason and knowledge of the good, and we are imitating this form of the good through balancing our lives in the proper ways, then we are not only imitating this form of the good, we are participating in the form of the good. And we are literally putting our souls in a good state, which is why Socrates in the Phaedo, when he was getting ready to die, was okay, because his state was in his state, the state of his soul, was in a good state. And that's why what we did with his body didn't matter. Right? And so that goes back to the beginning of the lecture, where we said, well, for Plato, what we are, or who we are, the self, is the soul, something non-material. And therefore, when we structure the soul in a way that is harmonized and embodies the form of the good, or participate in the form of the good, then we have a non-physical part of ourselves that's in a good state. And this is permanent. And this is true happiness. Nothing outside you can affect the virtues that you develop in your own self. And this is why the truly good life is the happy life, because it means that you are transforming yourself, creating yourself into a certain kind of being, into a certain kind of person, in a way that's permanent, right? In other words, you become the good, right? Your soul is good, and therefore you are good, i.e., you are happy, truly happy, because it's something that's permanent, right? And so ultimately, living life in accordance with the form of the good is true happiness, right? Because we are ordering our lives in a way that's harmonious and beautiful and balanced and so forth. And in balancing the different parts of ourselves, right, our appetites, and directing things, our lives in the right way, in the best ways possible, and directing our passionate, spirited element in the best way possible, then this will give us a certain kind of character, certain virtue that will be permanent, right? And then he talks about, Plato's famous for the four cardinal virtues, which include wisdom or prudence, wisdom, justice, those two are connected with reason, and then courage with the spirited element, and temperance, which is the control of our desires. So if you have those virtues, if you develop those virtues, then it will be the precondition, the foundation for all your other virtues. And then you will be in a happy state, so to speak, in a good state. So I'm going to leave it there, and then